better engage the speaker, please? Thank you.
We're actually going to have a little bonfire, kumbaya fire up here.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm going to switch around.
Okay, and if you haven't done so already, there's cookies and water in the back. So if you'd like some of those, go ahead and get some. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second out of 6 weekly forums entitled Let's Talk About Religious Diversity. My name is April Rose Nguyen, and I am one of ASPLU's at-large senators for this academic year. I have been planning these forums in collaboration with PLU's campus ministry, and more specifically, Interim University Pastor John Rosenberg, who is also here tonight. He's right there, in the front row. Collectively, these forums are designed to explore and learn more about some of the various faiths that exist in our community. The purpose of these forums is to help direct us towards clarity, understanding, awareness, and acceptance of the faiths being discussed. Tonight, we will explore the Jewish faith as presented by Jeff Friedman in place of Rabbi Bruce Kadden from Temple Bethel. Campus ministry and I hope that this presentation will help make this faith more transparent to you. Please refrain from any questions or comments until the end of the presentation, unless otherwise directed by the presenter. And now, please join me in welcoming our speaker for tonight, Jeff Friedman.
Can you hear me okay without that thing? Okay, thank you. That's obnoxious. Contradicting what she just said, anytime you have a question, please interrupt me. When I teach my Hebrew students Hebrew, usually I can see these big light bulb bubbles over their head, like, what's he talking about? And I'd rather stop and answer your question right then and there, as close as possible, than waiting until the very end of the presentation. Rabbi Kadden sends his apologies. We had a death of one of our clergy over the past 2 weeks, and Rabbi has taken over just for this evening, leading our choir in their preparation. Thank goodness it's not a full-time job for him in the choir, because if you've ever heard him sing, it wouldn't work. It just will not work. I'm one of the lay leaders in the temple. I've been a member of the temple for about 30 years, and I've been studying Jewish law, Jewish everything, the language, rituals, and everything for about 25 years. I've gone to some extra classes, things like that. So Rabbi has put his confidence in me, and hopefully we can have a nice go this evening. I want to keep it nice and informal. So again, if you have any questions, please speak up. As I understand, the topic was getting to know your Jewish neighbor. That's kind of interesting because I really didn't know what the core of the curriculum was supposed to be, so I just made it up. So learning about your Jewish neighbor, we have to dig into what Judaism is all about. And to do that, we have to look at a bunch of different books that are very important to us. The very first one is called Torah. And Torah, for us, is the Old Testament, the first books of the Bible, the first 5 books. It starts off with Genesis, the beginning of everything, and it ends with Moses being buried and the Jewish people moving across the river, Canaan, and beginning a new life. And that's where it ends. Your New Testament picks up a couple of years later, quite a few years later, and you do your thing. We recognize that there is a New Testament, but we don't study it. It's not part of our religion. So that's one of those little things of getting to know your neighbor When you ask me about the book of Luke or Romans or any of those, I'm afraid that I'm just going to have a big question bubble over my head because we normally do not study those texts. We study the first 5 books of the Bible. That's it. So if you were to come up to me again, I just put a great big question mark over my head, and we'll have to learn to cohabitate, if you will. First 5, everybody okay with the first 5 books? Is that pretty familiar? Genesis, Exodus? Okay. So we go through all of that over a period of 3 years. It takes us to read the entire New Testament. We break it into thirds so that when we chant, and we sing rather than read the Old Testament. It's set up in a series of notes called trope. And I guess over the past couple thousand years, people thought that they'd rather sing it rather than read it. So we've developed in Hebrew, this is the language of Hebrew, a way of singing the Old Testament rather than just reading it. And that goes the same with other parts of our readings. There's a part called the Haftorah, which is a commentary from prophets, and that's spelled wrong. You know what I mean. And the prophets are an intermediary set of books, and you may study them: Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, some of those prophets that started life around the 200s before. And so we read a little piece of that as we read or chant the Torah at the same time. We do that on Saturday normally. Saturday is our Sabbath. Genesis, if you go back to Genesis 1 and everything, through that period of time, there was darkness, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But on the 7th day, God rested. For us, that's Saturday. So we traditionally will read, sing the Torah, we'll sing prophets. We probably, as part of our service, will also sing psalms that were written by King David. And there's some really beautiful poetry. There's some beautiful tributes to God. There's tributes to the world, etc. in there. And so we will also include those as part of our service. So between Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms, we have the 3 main documents, if you will, that make up our service, that we study, that we pray, that we celebrate every week. Yes, sir?
Would it be the job of the cantor then to do that singing of those?
Normally, the cantor would sing or chant the Torah. For our particular temple, the cantor does not normally participate, just our operation. The cantor doesn't, so we have lay leadership that studies. I enjoy chanting the prophets. This next week I'm going to be chanting Kings 1, a little piece of it. But we have lay leaders that specialize in the Torah trope. And trope, again, are kind of a series of musical notes with these little symbols in them, and a different trope for the prophets. We want to kind of separate the two out a little bit. So those are our main documents that we kind of focus in on. In addition to that, then we have something called the Talmud, which was developed between 200 and 400 AD. And it was a bunch of old guys with long beards and really bad breath that sat around and they looked at the Torah, they looked at the Old Testament, and they nickel and dimed every single line of of the Torah and came up with these various laws. For example, we think of sunset, we think of sunrise, and we just say, oh, the sun's coming up, oh, the sun's going down. These guys codified it to looking at 3 different stars up in the sky. And when 3 individual people said, yeah, there's 3 stars up there, then we had sundown. Similar thing in the morning. And it actually had some very practical situations. Back in the time of Jesus, in the 0 to 100, there used to be the Roman people that were in that part of the world. And the Jewish people didn't really get along with the Romans very well. And so they set up guard stations to kind of protect themselves against the Romans, and the changing of the guard happened at sunrise and sunset. And so that was really important that the wise guys would say, yeah, time to change the guard when they looked up in the sky. So that's one of the things that's in the Talmud. There's 52 of these little books that talk about very specific parts of Jewish law. How to handle divorce, how to handle various holidays, how to do various things in Jewish life. And it takes about 7 years to go through every single page in the Talmud. It's that big and it's that concentrated. And there are people that do study 1 page a day, and again, it takes about 7 years to go through that. The Torah was written, we think, in Hebrew. The legend has it that God gave Moses the Torah at Sinai, and we think that it was written in Hebrew. Originally it was an oral law, then put into writing. The Talmud was written in Aramaic, which was the language of the time of Jesus. And because the Romans eventually said, you can't read, you cannot speak Aramaic anymore, we twisted and we tweaked the language just a little bit and it became Hebrew. So there's a few letter differences, there's a pronunciation difference. But the modern scholars have got an idea of how Aramaic works, but it's just not spoken very much anymore. Some of our prayers are still spoken in Aramaic, but it's not the major right now. Any questions so far? That's our main documents. We also have a document called the Kabbalah, and that is let me write that down. Kabbalah was developed in the late 1800s, and it was used and it was formulated to kind of look at the mystical or the spiritual side of life. And it's a really complicated document. It's a set of books. I've never even opened up a Kabbalah book yet because it really takes a specialized person to delve into the spirit and those various planes that spiritualism takes part of. But there are some very, very observant Jewish people, the scholars, that do nothing but live in the Kabbalistic world. Those are our main documents. There's a whole bunch of other little side documents, how to conduct oneself in life, again, dissecting Jewish practice, various different ways. And those are the things that a scholar, depending on your level of practice, would probably preach and teach to the people. The basic tenet or what we live for is a prayer called the Shema, S-H''M-A. And the Shema is found in the book of Deuteronomy, way towards the end of the Old Testament. And basically the Shema unifies us as Jews to believe that there is in fact one God. And it's not an awful lot different than a lot of the other religions. You have one God that you pray to. The difference between us is how we pray to God. You have an intermediary. I don't mean to offend anybody by that term. You have somebody that you pray to that conveys the message to God. We go directly to God. Doesn't mean we're wrong, doesn't mean we're right. It's a different way of looking at it. Similar to your Islamic fellow that you had a couple of weeks ago. They have a different way of praying to God, and that's what makes our religions different. The Shema tells us a number of things. It tells us how we are supposed to live a Jewish life. It tells us to follow various ways, such as some of our practices. We talk a lot about our children. It's just one of those things. Old Jewish grandmothers have nothing better to do than talk about their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And part of that little root is based here in the Shema. It says you'll teach your children diligently about the Shema. You'll speak of them all over the place. You'll pray when you lay down and when you rise up. The Shema is one of those prayers that said immediately before you die. We don't have a concept of confession like a number of other religions do. So we don't go to our rabbi and say, Rabbi, I did this particular deed or didn't do this particular deed. However, at the end of our Jewish year or the beginning of the new one, we have a kind of confessional that we say to God, God, I didn't exactly live the way you wanted me to live this year, and I'll do better next year. And that's about as close as a confessional as you're going to come. We'll talk a little bit more about the Shema in just a little bit. Services and holidays for us. If you go back to Genesis 2, the earth was dark. Emphasis the word dark and without form. And on the next day, God created light. So we have dark and light. And so our holidays, our days start the night before in darkness. So for example, if we have a major holiday, Hanukkah or some of these other days, our Sabbath starts the night before. Friday night is when our Sabbath starts and ends Saturday night. Again, based upon Genesis 6:2. So that's kind of interesting because it messes up the calendar in the worst way. A lot of the non-Jewish, like school districts, of course, will say that the next day, the morning, is when the holiday starts, and it messes them up all the time when the kids are not in school because of that. We have major holidays. We have Shabbat, which is our holiest day of the week, and it's very important for us. There's rest, there's refreshment. There's refreshment in terms of revitalizing our soul. We don't do any work on that day. There are 39 little provisions that we don't do various things because they didn't do these various things in the desert when Moses was leading the people through the desert. So there are a bunch of things that we don't do, like scissors, cutting. We don't do lifting. And I have to say, that's among the most observant people. We have various layers of Judaism, sects if you want to call them, starting with Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, which is by the book to the letter. You don't vary anything. You have we have Orthodox, it's a little bit watered down. You have conservative, which is a little bit more watered down, allows some latitude in the way you observe. And then you have Reform, which our congregation is, which I would consider liberal. We'll take the meaning of the Bible, we'll say, you know, that makes a whole lot of sense, but not for me. And so we'll be able to drive cars, for example. We'll be able to do various other things that normally the Orthodox would sit at home, they do their praying, and they don't turn on any electricity because that creates energy, and you're not supposed to do that according to the very Orthodox translation. After Reform, then there's something called Reconstructionist, which is very, very liberal, and it takes the power of the prayer to the people. So if we're in a service, all of us, and you say, kind of, I don't want to sing this prayer, I want to sing this prayer. That's the power of the people in Reconstructionists. So it's very liberal in that, you know, people are going to get their own way of praying, whatever comes to their heart, and this is that way of doing it. So the way we observe these various holidays and the like will vary between the ultra-Orthodox and the Reconstructionists. At the beginning of our year, we have a holiday called Rosh Hashanah. Usually happens in early September, messes up the schools really bad because the parents keep their kids out of class and stuff. But this is Rosh Hashanah is Hebrew for head of the year. So it's our new year, and it's purely a celebratory type of holiday. It's not meant for being really heavy. We don't do our repentance or our confession, if you will, on Rosh Hashanah. It's a celebration of the new year. 10 days later then, we have a holiday called Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the holiest of the holidays all year, and it is a situation where you do that repentance, that confessional kind of thing, if you will, and the entire day, 24 hours, is spent in prayer to God, revealing yourself, renewing your spirit, those types of things. We also fast on that day. We do not eat on that day at all. Don't drink, don't eat anything, as a way of sacrificing ourselves, if you will, to God. We're going to focus every bit of energy on the repentance kind of thing. Questions yet so far? Have I? Yes, sir.
Is that the one that's called the Day of Atonement?
Day of Atonement is, yes. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, exactly. We atone for our sins during the year. We have a number of prayers that list all sorts of different prayers, whether we've been maliced somebody in the business transaction, whether we have done various things wrong to our children or to our parents, a number of different things, and this goes on and on all day during that particular day. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, feel free to answer this later too. I'm curious about the relationship inside Judaism, like how the Reformists get along, like how they get along with the ultra-Orthodox, like what, you know.
Okay, almost every day you hear about something going on in Israel that's not Palestinian revolved, and almost always that has to do with the Reform and the ultra-Orthodox conflicting over various things. For example, the ultra-Orthodox do not believe that women should be rabbis. They should not be going to school. They should not be taking advanced education. They are, for lack of a better term, a second-class type citizen. They're there to be very modest and the like, whereas the Reform people, for example, in the past year have had numerous female rabbis. The conservative movement which is, again, a little bit more traditional than the Reform, has had their first female rabbis. So that little group from conservative, Reform, Reconstruction is very pro-woman, but it is causing a lot of grief in Israel because of that friction with the Orthodox. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, what about outside that? Or like what's in the US?
Not an awful lot, because there are not that many, in the grand scheme of things, there's only 3% of the US population is Jewish. Of that 3%, maybe 1/4% is the ultra-Orthodox, and they all live in Brooklyn, New York. So these are the guys you may see on TV sometimes with the big black hats and the beards with the little twisty things on their ears, and I'm going to talk about that. Those are the ultra-Orthodox people, and you just stay out of your way. That's the best way. You see them coming, and you just kind of, when you go to Israel on the airplane, they have a separate section of the airplane just for them. When, as a matter of fact, on Facebook, the source of everything, Factual, today there was a story about an El Al Airlines, which is the only airline in Israel. Some ultra-Orthodox guy objected to a movie. They said that the females were being pointed out in a very objectionable way, and they had to restrain the guy. It's that kind of old-fashioned, is what I call it, thinking. But that, you got to respect, that's the way they do business. That's the way they pray. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts about that? It is a completely different way. For example, your churches, for example, men and women sit together and they pray together and they enjoy the service together and everything. In a ultra-Orthodox or Orthodox temple, the men sit on one side and the women sit on another side. And there's this curtain down the middle so that they should not interfere with each other. It's that kind of old-fashioned thinking that pervades the Orthodox. And that's the way it is in life as well. For example, you cannot shake a woman's hand in Orthodoxy. Orthodox women are supposed to wear wigs and long dresses to promote modesty, very important to them. And that, interestingly enough, goes back to the Bible. I believe in either Exodus or Numbers, there are some situations where men are not supposed to sleep with men, unmarried women are not supposed to sleep with men. A number of those types of biblical passages that the Orthodox have translated to, this is the way we're going to do our prayers, and we're going to observe life. So if you are Orthodox and you look at us poor little Reform people, it doesn't work out very well. Yeah. We have a number of other holidays throughout the year. Sukkot is another one. You may see, and not very often in the Tacoma area, these little tents that are set up in people's houses or next to people's houses. And there's a portion in the Torah that talks about you shall host somebody for 8 days in this little booth. And the booth has a specified way of being built, but it's a way of getting people to come together and to celebrate the crops that are being cultivated at that time of year. That's a minor holiday. Hanukkah, I'm sure you've probably all heard about, and the great conflict that we seem to have with you folks about Christmas. Yeah, usually Hanukkah shows up right around Christmas time, a little bit later, a little earlier, and there is one particular symbol that you will see in a Jewish house that differentiates us from everybody, and that's an 8-stick candelabra called the menorah. And there is a minor book in all of the scriptures called the Book of Maccabees, and it details a fight between the Maccabees and the people that were surrounding them. Basically, the Maccabees were these little tiny shrimps, and everybody else were these big people, and they were pretty much outnumbered. And in one time, they ran out of oil to do their lights, and they were given just enough oil to last one day, and mysteriously it lasted 8 days. And so we have the festival of Hanukkah to observe that occurrence, that miracle. The presents that you hear about the kids, that's a minor thing. That's a recent marketing development. Thank Macy's and thank FAO Schwartz for that. Kind of a new thing starting like maybe in the 1930s or 40s-ish. It used to be that parents would pat their kids on the head and give them a kiss, and every day during that period you would eat these, like they're called latkes, which are kind of like fried potatoes, if you will. And you'd also eat these things called sufganiyot, which are like donuts, jellied donuts. And you get the fried, this oil thing. Well, it happens during the entire 8 days. And again, it's supposed to represent the oil that showed up in the candles. So it's really a minor holiday, but it's something that brings families together. Right around Easter time, we have a holiday called Passover. That's very well illustrated in the book of Exodus. God tells us that we're not supposed to eat unleavened bread for a period of 7 days, and there's a very elaborate description of what you can and cannot eat and various things like that. It has been said, and I'm sure that there's lots of controversy about Jesus' last meal supposedly being a Passover Seder. I will leave that to your studies, whether it in fact happened or not. Coincidentally, there was unleavened bread at the table, and there were a number of other things that may point the finger towards that situation. But it just coincidentally happens right about that same time. Talked about the movements and the various degrees of tradition and observance. Our language is Hebrew. And again, Hebrew came about roughly the 1st century AD, again because of the Romans and their influence on people. And let me give you just kind of a little look at what Hebrew looks like. Hebrew is read from right to left, just the opposite of what we normally read. So, for example, the very first letter in the Hebrew alphabet is called Aleph. Aleph. Bet is the second letter. So, for example, this is the Hebrew word shalom. You probably have heard that word a little bit. And it's written shalom, again, from right to left. And we have letters, we have vowels. Unfortunately for Hebrew, Hebrew words have more than one meaning. So, for example, this week, I believe, in the Torah, we read about Moses coming down from Mount Sinai, and you probably have heard about the glow that may have come from his face, or you may have heard about a veil that disguises his face because he's been talking with God. Unfortunately, the Hebrew word for veil is also the Hebrew word for horns. So, for example, if you see, what is it, Michelangelo's Moses, it shows him with horns. That was Michelangelo's translation of that particular word. And it's one that's been dogging us for thousands of years. Do Jewish people have horns? And it's just a translation of that particular word. The word shalom can mean peace. It can mean completeness. So if you are not feeling well, you don't have shalom because parts of you are not complete. And we believe very strongly that somebody should be complete, and so we have special prayers to encourage them for healing and completeness. So that's a little bit about Hebrew. That's how we pray, and that's how we read. Of course, we do have English translations, and we do have song along the way as well. Our calendar is built on the moon. We have a lunar calendar as opposed to the solar calendar that everybody else has. So consequently, because the moon circles the earth not exactly every 12 months, sometimes it's 12.25 months, there's little inconsistencies here. We may have 13 months in our calendar to make up for that. So we have a lunar calendar, and that's how we survive. Excuse me a second. Our months start when there is a new moon. So that beautiful moon that we saw the other night, not quite the new moon. That's the older moon. In about 15 days, we'll have the start of our next month. Earlier I talked about the Shema from the book of Deuteronomy. And I told you about teaching to children, speaking about the children. You recite the Shema when you get up in the morning and when you go to bed at night. That's part of the Shema prayer. It also says that you bind the Shema on your arm and between your eyes. So occasionally you will see forgive me, I'm very left-brained, and I still draw stick people. That's the best balloon that I can do. Occasionally you will see pictures, mainly again from Brooklyn or the very Orthodox in Israel, that will have this little box on their head, and they'll also have wrappings on their arms. And that is part of this prayer. These are called phylacteries, and I believe that's a Greek word, if I'm not mistaken. Close enough? Yeah, and phylacteries, again, are the little box, and the little box contains the Shema prayer and a couple of others, and then you wrap it around your arm, and it has a box in it which has the same prayers. And that is dictated inside the Shema also. One of the things that you will see in a Jewish house that you won't see in any other house is at the doorway to the house, there's this little thing called a mezuzah. The word mezuzah means doorpost, and so if here's the door and the doorpost of a house, which is outside, you will see a little box that sits up towards the top of the door, usually within about a hand breadth from the top, going inward, and that contains also the Shema prayer. And that's part of the book from the Shema that says you will write the law on the doorpost of your house. And in Israel, they have gates that guard their courtyard. And so you write it on the doorpost of your house and on your gates in this little courtyard area. And so that's where the mezuzah comes from. And the thing that I mentioned about the hand breadth, that's written in the Talmud somewhere, that somebody said, you gotta figure out how high off of the door so that everybody can touch it when they go inside the house. And they went on to further explain that you could put one of these little mezuzah things on every door in the house except the bathroom. So your bedrooms will have them, libraries will have them, your kitchen may have a door, got a little mezuzah in there. I tell you, it's got to be a marketing racket somewhere. But these little mezuzahs are there, and they uphold a little piece of this Shema. So it's a constant reminder to us that we have a Jewish house. It's also a reminder to those who are not Jewish that come up to the house that there is one there. There are some proselytizing religions that go around the neighborhood, and I like to have fun with these people because they don't know what the little box is, and they're going to give me their little pamphlet, and I say, do you know what that little thing is up there? And no, I have no clue, and I'll explain to them that we're a Jewish house and everything. Oh, thank you for educating me, and they toddle on off. So, it's just a matter of education in that case, but if you should happen to go to a Jewish house, you will see that, and so that's part of your Jewish neighbor. Other symbols, you may see this little hat. It's called a yarmulke, it's called a kippah, it's called a skull cap. What it does is it brings us, it's a reminder that we're lower than God. And some people choose to wear them, some people don't choose to wear them. It's not a prescription. There's nothing anywhere that says you have to wear it. It's been subject to an awful lot of translation over the years. Congregations will either insist upon it or not insist upon it. If you don't wear it in an Orthodox situation, it's kind of like a slap in the face. I normally do not wear one because I happen to have a public business that could be offended by seeing it. And unfortunately, that's the problem with a lot of Americans is they see this and they immediately stereotype you as being Jewish, and they may walk away. And I've had that happen a couple of times. So I usually wear it when I'm going into my temple or when I'm in a holy house such as this. I would normally wear it. Normally wear it in a cemetery. Again, just about any place that's holy. And I have a different definition of holy than a lot of other people do. But to me, this is a holy structure right here. Also, you may see in pictures a fringe, we call it a tallit. It's a fringe that has little strings that hang off of it. And again, that's part of the Shema as well. It says that you shall wear a fringed clothing with a little blue line in it, and it's more of a reminder, again, of the Shema and reverence to God. Very, very important to us. I talked a little while ago about the Orthodox guys. These little things here that come, you may see them coming off of their sideburns. They're called peyot. And there is a passage in Leviticus that says that you shall not shave the corners of your head. So the Orthodox, again, being very literal in the translation of the Old Testament, will not shave this part of their head. And so they have these long locks that come down. Usually they'll have long beards as well, and that's just in observance of the book of Leviticus. Death and dying, might want to talk about that just a little bit, because that separates us from our non-Jewish neighbors as well. We have in Judaism a fundamental tenet that life is extremely holy to us, that life is continuing and death is part of life. So as we go through life and somebody dies, we honor them for a 1-year period. We start with the first 7 days, and that 7 days is when the casket is lowered down into the ground. And that's something that we call Shiva, which is the Hebrew word for 7. And so a family who is Jewish and somewhat reflective will stay in their house for the entire 7 days. People will bring them food. People will help them in any way they can for this 7 days so that they can attend to their grieving and not worry about all these external things. So typically every night there is a service, a little memorial service. Typically people will bring food and they'll have a community or a family celebration. At the end of the 7 days then, the mourning family goes back to civilization. They've grieved, they've come to terms with the death, and they're now coming back into life. And so for the next part of that year, they'll know that the person has died. They have that big loss in their heart. And on the first anniversary and every anniversary thereafter, we have a special prayer for those people to remember the deceased. Something a little different than other religions that don't remember the deceased. Every year we do this prayer, so we could conceivably have 50 or 60 names that we read each week, remembering previous generations, people that have left the family, even though that family may still not be there. So it is part of our mourning process. It's part of our living process as well. Israel. Israel is something that's very near and dear to many, but not all Jewish people. It is, as I'm sure your Islamic friend said, kind of the Mecca of the world. Jerusalem is a capital for everybody. For the Islamic faith, for the Christian faith, for the Jewish faith, it is our religious capital of the world. And everybody tries in their own mind to go to Israel and at least see it. I was fortunate in 2010 to go for a week, and it's indescribable. The things that you see there, the things that you do, the smells of the market, I mean, just absolutely everything. And it's enough of a clincher so that you may want to stay. And there is a term called aliyah. And the word aliyah means to go to another place and to stay there and to adopt it into your life. And so people that go to Israel with the intention of aliyah are celebrated by the government. Sometimes they're given pensions to stay. Sometimes it becomes a spiritual, for lack of a better term, a spiritual mecca to stay there and to adopt the Israeli way and all the spirits that go there. It's just absolutely incredible. The politics you kind of have to go with, unfortunately, and the politics are all over the world. When we were there in 2010, you may remember, maybe not, an embargo ship from Turkey made its way down to Israel loaded with a bunch of supposedly peace goods. And we were there that particular week that brouhaha happened. And we were at the hospital where they had brought in people from the boat that were wounded. And it's just indescribable how the world will react either for or against, and it all depends on your own politics. It's really amazing. The continuing thing with the land settlements, pushing out the Palestinians, that's been going on for 2,000 years. There's nothing new there. It's just how the current ownership and management wants to tackle the issue. And you hope that it's going to end sometime, but you never know. That's a difficult one to work out. That's my 2 pages. So now I get to answer your questions. We have a half an hour. Yes, ma'am.
So if the Torah is basically the Old Testament of the Bible, why is Judaism and Christianity two separate religions?
That's a good question. We determined a long time, a couple thousand years ago, that that's what God gave Moses to bring to the people. The New Testament, as I understand it, and again, I haven't studied it at all, was something that was written by Luke?
Early followers of Jesus.
Okay, the early followers of Jesus, and that would be consistent with my answer. The earlier followers of Jesus, and if I may, to us, Jesus was not a Messiah. He was a very learned rabbi, a teacher, an outstanding speaker. I mean, he taught a lot of good to the people. We just don't recognize him as the Messiah. Our Messiah hasn't come yet. But we determined, again, that God gave Moses just the Old Testament and waited a couple thousand years for him to pass on the New Testament to Jesus. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, so I think what I'm getting from this is the basic difference is Christians believe in Jesus Christ, why Jews do not.
We don't believe that the Messiah, whatever that kind of being is, and I think that's kind of a personal interpretation of what the Messiah. We did not think that Jesus was bringing the world, especially the Jewish world, to world peace and all of the good things that he talked about. So we said, okay, he's a rabbi, but he's not a Messiah. And so that's where our differentiation kind of comes across. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what did like the Jewish community just in this area, like the people that you talked to, think about Netanyahu coming to speak to Congress and all of the
That's a good question.
politics about
That's
that?
a good question. I'm not really well versed in politics. I never really listened to all of that stuff. Personally, I think that the head of any government should be able to visit Congress and make a talk, regardless of their political belief. If Putin wanted to come and address Congress, I think that's great that we get to hear him. So the fact that Netanyahu is boiling something new this week that takes forever and ever to resolve itself and not show up in front of Congress, I think that that's kind of, that's not right. That's a real political can of worms, and I'm sure that I didn't give you the right answer, but I don't know the right answer.
Do people have a particular opinion about like the like government, or like is it, is there a different, I guess, is there a difference in opinion between the government and the state itself?
If you ask 2 Jews, you'll get 3 opinions. Real seriously. There are as many Jews that are opposed to the settlement stuff that's going on as those that say, yeah, let's expand into Palestine and let's just keep the war going for a couple thousand more years. I think because we are so peace-oriented and pro-life, I think that they would rather have some kind of an agreement between everybody and stop the stupidity. Last comment was my own, but I think that that's what, because we are pro-life, we would probably rather see some kind of an agreement at some time. Ask Rabbi and he'll probably give you a slightly different answer, I'm sure, because he lived in Israel for a couple years. Yeah. On this side of the chamber? Oh, come on, you gotta have some question. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. You got to explain that the payat, the
Yeah.
sides,
Mhm.
yeah, that they were, I guess, interpreted like literally. How is it supposed to be interpreted actually, I
The-
guess.
The literal interpretation from Leviticus is, you shall not shave the corners of your head.
Yeah,
So they have interpreted this as being a corner, and they're not going to do anything with the hair that grows down there.
okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess it's just like, so that's what the very conservative or the very,
Very orthodox.
very orthodox,
Yes.
okay. So, okay, sorry, I guess I thought I had the question. I mean, that kind of answers the question, but I guess like,
Where are you unfulfilled?
um, I mean, I guess I just don't understand why that's a thing, like, I guess if that's the literal interpretation, is there supposed to be some other interpretation, or that's just literally
According to
it?
them, they go by every word that's in the Old Testament.
Okay,
Religiously.
okay,
And so if they say, for example, you shall not eat fish from the bottom of the sea, that means we can't eat catfish. Those that are kosher, that keep the dietary laws, will not eat shellfish, will not eat the fish that's on the bottom. There are a number of other foods in dietary law that the Orthodox will not touch.
okay.
Yeah. Sir?
You mentioned kosher, and I was actually curious about that. What does that mean?
Okay, the word kosher means unclean. Actually means clean. So if it's not kosher, that means it's unclean. And there are some parts in Exodus or Numbers, I believe, that go into specific detail. Birds of prey, things that slither on the ground, referring to the Garden of Eden. Interestingly, a honeybee is not kosher, but the honey is. And that's one that I still don't understand how that works. So there are various classifications of food groups that are not supposed to be eaten. There's a passage, you shall not boil the kid in the mother's milk. So that's where meat and milk have to be separated.
No pizza.
I'm sorry?
No pizza.
Yeah, I eat pizza.
Well, because if it's got cheese and meat on it together.
No, that's not good. No. And that's where pork comes along, and bacon, and all of those good things. And I don't keep kosher, so it doesn't bother me. More bacon, the better. But no, they do have, kosher type pizzas. However, the flour that goes into that pizza has to be certified kosher. So, anybody pick up on kosher dill pickles? Anybody ever heard that? You know what makes them kosher? Garlic. That's it. It's not that they're circumcised from the plant or anything like that. It's the fact that they're kosher style. So there are these various food groups that and even Reformed people will not go, meat and milk and all those other things. Or at least they say they don't. There's also something called California kosher. You eat in home kosher, but then you go outside and you have yourself a cheeseburger. I mean, that's the conflict that people have. Speaking of circumcision, back in Genesis, our good friend Abraham, who is the father of both Judaism and Islam, essentially, got a message from God one day that said, if you're going to be Jewish, you need to circumcise yourself, your children, and everybody going forward. And that theme, unfortunately, carries forward in the rest of Genesis and Exodus. Moses went out with a knife and circumcised all the boys and stuff like that. And so that is a sign of a Jewish male. Not necessarily one that you want to check your neighbor on, but it's a sign of a Jewish boy. Typically happens at 8 days after birth, where the child is circumcised and also given a Hebrew name. According to Jewish law, for the first 7 days of the child's existence, they are not really a person spiritually. Obviously, there's a body there and everything, but they're not given a Hebrew name. And if they happen to be buried, they pass away in those 7 days, they're given an unmarked grave, which is, yeah, exactly. I feel sad because in our cemetery over in Lakewood, we have a number of baby X's 50, 60 years, and that's just Jewish law. Yeah. What else? I'm sure you've got to have other questions. I'm sure there's a ton of things that I haven't mentioned, but you want to ask about your neighbor, we've got it. Sir?
We talked about pro-life and the 7-day, in terms of whether you're
Whether
a
you're
real person
whether
or
you're a
not.
person or not, exactly.
So, and I'm sure it varies in the different groups, but where are Jews on abortion, for example?
They're pro-life, and that's a really tough one that still is kind of going on. And I think the current theology is that they are in favor of keeping the baby as much as possible. Obviously, if there are medical issues, that's an extenuating circumstance. But if at all possible, to keep the baby. I'm not really up on contraception or those issues. I just never really studied it. So I don't know what the Jewish issue is towards that. My guess is that it probably is not approved. But again, I don't know. Judaism goes so far, those Orthodox people, that if you make a person blush, obviously blushing means that there's a rushing of blood to the head. That's not pro-life. So the ultra-Orthodox will make you say a special prayer and ask for apology for making that person blush. That's Orthodox for you. I do not agree with the 1890s translation of Orthodox. It's just very odd for me. They're stuck, in my opinion, they're kind of stuck in their way, but that's their way of practicing religion. So you gotta respect it. Yes, ma'am.
Can anyone practice Judaism?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Can anyone practice Judaism?
Well, okay, that's a really good question. Can anyone practice Judaism? The answer is not really, any more than I can practice Catholicism. A person needs to be converted from their current religion to Judaism. That usually takes a couple of years. For women, it involves immersion in rainwater bath. For men, it requires a circumcision, or in the case of circumcised males, a pinprick on the end of their penis to symbolize that situation. So you may need to learn Hebrew. That varies between rabbi to rabbi. The rabbi in Bremerton insists upon at least a basic class of Hebrew. The text that they use, it's amazing, it's almost universal. A couple of study guides and things like that. But it generally takes about 2 years to do that. And then you could practice Judaism. But let me preface that with something that just kind of came to my mind. It goes to what's in your heart, whether you practice any religion for that matter. So I guess you need to decide whether you are going to practice Judaism from the heart, in taking in all of these various things that happen, or if you're going to, how do I say it, go through the motions, for lack of a better term. You kind of like the idea, of some of these prayers and things like that, but your fundamentalism, and man, you need to help me out here. It really goes to your praying from the heart, and that's true with any religion. Purgatory, that's what happens in Judaism. Typically for 11 months, everybody is sent to this purgatory area, and they're kind of judged in a spiritual way. We don't have a concept of heaven, so people just don't go up and see the bearded guy at the gate. There's a concept of spiritual review and things like that. We call it the world to come rather than heaven. And we don't know what that looks like, obviously, but it's kind of this 11-month holding period where a person is judged on their merits or their demerits. The persons with the merits get to go over to the world to come. The people that are stuck in purgatory go to an area called Gehenna. And no, this is not a city outside of Columbus. There actually is a city named Gahanna, Ohio. Yeah, spelled our way.
Whoa.
And Gehenna is like the real purgatory. Not hell like you think of the fire and all of that stuff. It's just a place that's opposite of the world to come. Yeah. That answer your question, kind of?
Yeah.
Are you satisfied?
Sort of.
Okay, let's get rid of the sort of. What more would you like to know?
Because there's always, in any religion, there's always never really knows for certain about the afterlife. So that's where the sort of comes
Your
from.
word in any or every is incorrect. Because Muslim, I don't believe, has a concept of heaven or hell either. So some religions have a heaven and hell. Others have different ways of looking at those concepts. Is that kind of fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Not meaning to argue with you, but every religion, you know, even if you think about the people in India that believe in reincarnation, and that poor kitty over there was my cousin Vinny, that's a different way of looking at things. Yes, ma'am.
For you guys, the idea of the afterlife purgatory, where did that come from? Did that come
Well,
from
purgatory,
somewhere in the Old
that
Testament,
concept, the
or-
Divine Comedy, was an Italian guy named Dante Alighieri. Yeah, and so he kind of shocked the world by these various layers. We don't have those various layers, just the way we believe in the world to come or the opposite.
But where did that idea come from? Like what text?
Is there
did
a
that
book
come from?
somewhere?
Is there like an origin? for
Yeah,
it?
I don't know that it's in the Torah specifically. It definitely is in the Talmud, which is a translation of the Torah. So these old guys that were sitting around said, we got to send these people somewhere spiritually. My guess is, and I haven't done an awful lot of research on it, that's where that concept comes from.
Because I know for the Catholic Church, they came up with it kind of as a way to more or less get more money, because it's not really in the Christian Bible necessarily. So
Okay.
I was wondering if like,
How do they? I'm curious. How do they get money?
because they would say, oh well, if you donate this much money, then
You can be
you
absolved.
can be absolved of your, or you can
Okay.
absolve your relatives of their sins and things
Okay.
like that. So like after their relative died, if they hadn't been baptized or whatever, then
Pay the church, and you can pretend like it
you
never
can
happened.
send them straight to heaven. Yeah. So they came up with
I
this,
have not really researched or known anything about that, so we don't have something like that. We're big believers in charity, but not for specific reasons like that.
yeah, that's like way long ago. So obviously.
Yeah, like 1400s, 1200s.
Yeah, I think they came up with it around 1300 or something
Okay.
like that. So
That guy Martin Luther have anything to do with it?
they came up with it before that. That was one of his
Okay.
complaints to the church, actually.
Okay. Like I say, I may have learned about it in the 8th grade in
Yeah.
school, but, you know, I don't practice it, so I don't know much about it.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Somebody that knows their history. Good for you. Excellent. I can turn the flashlight off now? Okay. This side? I'm seeing you smile so nice. You've got to have some kind of a question. Stump the speaker. Okay. You had your time.
Oh, I do have.
Okay, now you've got your time.
So in Reform, I know in Orthodoxy they wear tekalit separate
Yes.
and on tali.
Yes.
In Reform, do they wear tekalit separate?
Good question. They're, among the Orthodox, they want to have what they call a talit katan, which is a piece of dress that they put below their shirt with the little fringes on it and everything. And they wear that all day long. If you ever want to get an idea of what all this is, there is a movie several years ago called A Stranger Among Us. And it was a crime story having to deal with the religious people in Brooklyn. And it goes through all of what you're talking about, the garb, how they do business with women, all of these kinds of things. So they have this talit katan that they wear in addition to the talit that we would normally see during a service. But they wear that they wear it to bed, they wear it all the
What
place.
about in Reform?
Reform, it's a matter of personal choice. I can't think of anybody in the synagogue that wears it. I really can't. But I also have to say that the choice to wear it varies on personal discretion. I may want to adopt an Orthodox lifestyle that believes in that kind of thing, so I'll wear it even though I'm Reformed.
Sure.
Yeah.
So would you have a problem wearing, like, if you wanted to wear a talit katan out in public but not a kippah, or a kippah and not?
The person that wears the talit katan
Uh-huh.
would always wear a kippah,
Yeah.
or would wear one of those big black hats,
Yeah.
or something, or they'll wear a kippah and a big black hat together, so that if they take the hat off,
Yeah.
this is still there. Yeah. Oh, to go to Brooklyn is a real trip. I mean, they're stuck back in the 1800s. It's unbelievable, and the way they treat their family is crazy. Usually 8 or 9 kids. Yeah, that's typical. The boy children are like the most revered kids in the world, and the women are trained, the little girls are trained to be like mommy. And it's as sexist as it sounds, but that's the way they're comfortable with it. Yeah,
Thank you.
my pleasure. Any other? Okay, go home. Movie's over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alright, before everybody leaves, there's at the insides of every table, there's a reflection paper that I'd like for you guys to fill out, and then just kind of leave it there and I'll pick it up. But and grab cookies on your way out. Thank you all for coming.